It's now time for your Election Crimes Bulletin with Greg Palast.
And this is Dennis Bernstein with Greg Palast. The Election Crimes Bulletin continues because the election crimes continue. And joining us today, along with Greg Palast, is our special guest, Zach D. Roberts. He is the frontline courageous photographer who's been taking aim on the extreme right wing, even as sometimes they tend to take aim on him. So, Greg, welcome back. Zach,
glad to be with you.
Welcome back. You're the guy is in the news, the guy that we've been tracking for a long time, Ali Alexander, who is he's the linchpin. He's the connecting tissue between the old Republican Party and the extreme right-wing, violent new Republican Party. Shall we, maybe, Zach, give us a little bit of how you met him and what you can tell us about Ali Alexander? Because he's been before the committees now, and he's saying some interesting things. He seems to be selling out his brothers and sisters.
Yes, because Zach's the guy who is the guy who goes undercover, who takes the blows, literally. And it was on before the January 6th riot. Zach was able to get inside a gathering with Alex Jones, Ali Alexander, and the indicted Nick Fuentes, who is a Christian nationalist. And Ali Alexander, as we've discussed before, gets up this is in Georgia, because this is where they were fighting to get, if they could overturn Georgia, they could get Trump elected. And he said, we're going to light this S, and I can't say the word, on fire, unless they give us Trump. So Jones and Alexander were already.
This is in Atlanta, and we can actually. I think Zach is with us now. Are you there, Zach?
Yep, I'm back. Yep.
Okay.
Great,
yep.
Terrific. So, why don't you just to step back? Greg was sort of outlining it, but give us more. When you got in there first and met Ali Alexander, what was going on? What was going through your mind? What did you learn in terms of the atmospheric pressure on the ground there in Georgia?
Well, I mean, it was every other week or so there would be a protest that had local militia members. You can open carry AR-15s in Georgia. So literally right on the steps of the Capitol, militiamen in full kit with AR-15s, handguns, extra rounds on their person. Were holding rallies and participating alongside with Stop the Steal organizers like Scott Pressler and Ali Alexander. The first night that I got into Georgia was literally that rally that Greg Palast was just talking about, and literally just drove into Atlanta to the governor's mansion, parked, and ran up and saw three people who I've known quite well for a while. I've been covering: Alex Jones, Christian fascist Nick Fuentes, who has become unfortunately very well known now, basically advising Kanye West on his supposed presidential campaign, and of course Ali Alexander, who is also now, I guess, supposedly advising Kanye West. He's taken over for other Catholic fascists, Milo Yiannopoulos. And so that was basically the crowd. That was a very small group of supporters. I think it was mostly, honestly, a bunch of Reupers, which is Nick Fuentes' people, and a bunch of Alex Jones camera people and kind of hangers-on, because he had his own kind of caravan thing going on. And they had just come down from, literally driven down. They must have been a couple hours ahead of me. Driven down from Washington, D.C., where they had one of the first, there was a Million MAGA March, where tens of thousands of MAGA supporters, Nick Fuentes' Christian fascists, all Oath Keepers, all these different groups. It was one of the real preparation days for what was going to happen on January 6th, just in a couple weeks. All the same groups were there, all the same people. The Proud Boys were in an enormous mass there. I got actually threatened by one of them. That was within like an hour of me being on the ground there. But when I was in Atlanta, that was just literally the first day, and seeing that, and nothing really changed after that. It was every couple weeks there was yet another protest. Ali would come back in a month and hold a rally with a whole bunch of different militias right on the ground that actually swore everyone into the militia that was there. It was a very odd scene.
Okay.
This is Atlanta now you're talking about?
Yes, yeah, on the steps of the Capitol before it as well.
Right. And this was sort of an outgrowth. You picked up this movement in Charlottesville, right? That was sort of the pre-sentiment. That was like the kickoff, if you will, the incredibly violent pro-Klan, anti-Semitic, pro-fascist rally in Charlottesville. That's sort of where it all opened up, and that's where you came eye to eye with the extreme right wing. You're shooting a camera, and they were shooting, ready to shoot guns.
Yeah, I mean, I always say that actually it was Chris Kobach that brought me into this, covering into this world, and when we covered Crosscheck back in the day, because he's an anti-immigrant lawyer, and so he would run in a lot of these same groups that these guys would run in, and then it kind of drifted into covering things like Charlottesville and then Murfreesboro and all these other towns that unfortunately become known by bad things that happen there. And so the ties between the supposed, as they say, and this is big air quotes that I'm saying around this, election integrity movement and the extreme far right it's just, the Venn diagram is a full circle. It's always something they've been cared about. I mean, Greg was covering it before I even started working for him, back when he had Republican legislators telling him that the Democrats were busing tens of thousands of Mexicans across the border to vote for Democrats in New Mexico and Arizona. And so this sort of insane big lie has been a core tenet of the Republican Party in a lot of states, and honestly on the national level, at least since the Bush administration. And anyone that Lynn Cheney or anyone else that tries to tell you otherwise is just lying to you.
All right, that's Zach Roberts. He's a photographer. He has been working with Greg Palast for photographing, putting his life on the line to photograph the extreme right-wing front line. Now, Greg, let's pick it up with Ali Alexander, because official Washington is now very interested in him, and he either has information that's real or made up, but it's, if you will, significant either way. You want to talk a little bit about what he's been doing?
Yes. Well, let's put this. Let's. It's very important to remind people. We're talking about these guys, Nick Fuentes and Ali Alexander. You're thinking, well, they're far fringe people. What do we care? They're not that fringe. No. Number one, Nick Fuentes, as you know, just had dinner with Donald Trump. This guy is an important one. Zach identifies him as a Catholic fascist. It's very important to understand that these guys are not just small fringe players. Ali Alexander, when Zach was investigating him in Atlanta at the same time, Zach uncovered, and I want to give him the credit for this, Zach uncovered that he was on the payroll of the Georgia Republican Party and the Republican National Senate campaign. Because remember, there was a runoff at that time with Warnock, Reverend Warnock, and John Ossoff, and that was held January 5, that runoff. So you have to understand the connection between the January 6 riot and the January 5 runoff and the fight over the electoral votes of Georgia. So Ali Alexander was, he's not some fringe rioter nutcase. He's a guy who was on the payroll of the national and state Republicans. In addition, he was in constant contact with a guy named Donald Trump, the president of the United States, who was constantly referring to him, by the way, as Sammy Davis Jr. because of his really uncanny, almost twin-like look like Sammy Davis.
I think it's a lot of just the mustache, but yeah, he perfects this deliberately. But the important thing is he was dealing with the president of the United States, and in addition, and this is very important, and again, Zach was the center of led the investigation. We were able to get the text messages from a group called Women for America First. They were the ones who held the rally at the Ellipse that Trump spoke at. And this is very, very important. From the text messages we got, they were trying to stop Ali Alexander from leading a march from the Ellipse to the Capitol,
because as one of them told me on background, obviously not attribution, everyone knew what would happen if you simply let a crowd of thousands of angry people unleash them on the Capitol. You have to understand, Women for America First, very pro-Trump, they wanted to overturn the election, but they wanted to do it legally. They promised in writing, and I have their permit. They have the permit with the National Park Service that said, we will not march to the Capitol. That's in big black letters. We will not march to the Capitol. And when the National Park Service was nervous that there was advertisements to go to the Capitol, they said, that's not us. That's not true. And they said, this is Ollie Alexander who's promoting this. Now, say, well, then what is so what? So who's this guy, Ollie Alexander? The truth is that Alexander said, and the White House has never contradicted him, that he and Alex Jones, he was co-hosting some of Alex Jones' crazy InfoWars shows, that he and Alex Jones were contacted by the White House. Remember, they've been in contact with people like Mark Meadows and stuff. They were contacted by the White House and told to lead the march from the ellipse to the Capitol. Now, Ollie Alexander, who just testified to the January 6th committee, and his testimony has now been released, he kept saying, well, the White House told us to lead the march to the Capitol, but we were going to lead a peaceful march. But as Women for America First said, because they were on the hook for the legal liability and the financial liability, they said, there's no marshals, there's no toilets. It's against the law because, remember, this was in the middle of COVID. You can't have mass meetings in the middle of Washington, D.C., going across the city. Most important, there were no monitors, no police, and no warning that thousands of people were going to descend without any controlling group, without any notice to the D.C. cops, nothing except promises to the D.C. cops. This would not happen. And here's the thing. Donald Trump personally, the president, knew that he was not supposed to lead a march to the Capitol. And yet he gets up on that microphone about 1 p.m. on January 6th and says, we're marching to the Capitol. Peacefully, he adds, but that's a hand-waving thing because we all know it doesn't take a genius to figure out what happens when you have an uncontrolled mob.
I'm going to march
unleashed.
with you. I mean, he said, I'm going to march with you. And that's why it's so believable, the testimony about the battle in the limo, him grabbing the guy, because he had every intention of leading that freaking rally, and he would have led the hanging of Mike Pence, perhaps. But that was
here's the thing.
That was what his
so
mind
people know what you're
state
talking
was.
about. The Secret Service said, "My God, it's illegal. We cannot facilitate." Remember, they are still officers of the United States of America. They cannot legally facilitate the president of the United States committing a crime. So they knew, and it was also they have to protect the physical body of the president, of the presidency. And so they said, we're taking this limo back to the White House. And apparently the word is, and no one can, it's still controversial, that literally Trump tried to grab the limo wheel and he was blocked by the Secret Service. And he literally tried to grab the limo wheel to turn it to go to the Capitol. He wanted to lead the riot/march. So it's very important to understand that we have these text messages. If you go to gregpalast.com, you'll see the actual text messages saying, oh my God, Ollie Alexander keeps advertising that there will be a march. We've promised the Park Service there will be no march. There cannot be a march. It's dangerous. We have to stop it. Ollie Alexander said under oath, which is a complete lie, that he was blocked from getting on the microphone at the ellipse because he was going to tell people we're not marching. But that contradicts his other statement on the air with Alex Jones that he was called by the White House to lead the march. He agreed to lead the march. He went to the parking lot G, to lead the march. And that's what happened. So the White House directed this illegal march. Again, it's not that the march went out of control. I want people to understand. This is really important. The march did not go out of control. The march itself was the uncontrolled beginning of the riot. Trump knew that it was illegal. It was wrong. The Secret Service tried to stop him and successfully. Literally, the Secret Service had to kidnap our own president to stop him from leading a riot on the Capitol. Think about that.
And it really is. Again, I can't stress this enough, that the hiring, the paying of Ali Alexander really was, and you guys reported this really
Yes.
early, was really the beginning of the deep transformation of the Republican Party into an extreme right-wing, pro-fascist operation. And we can see what's going on in now, who's in control, and what they're asking for. They want the borders closed before they'll let Kevin get his job for a few weeks.
Well, there's one other thing to understand. When you say correctly, the Republican Party is split, and it definitely is. But understand who hired Ali Alexander. This is Brian Kemp, the so-called moderate governor of Georgia, who's been endorsed by the Wall Street Journal for president, who's getting endless praise from the New York Times and the establishment. What they do is they're playing a game. There's those who are publicly ultra right wing, the ones that you see, bitch slapping McCarthy for the speakership. But the Republican Party as a whole, its officialdom, the Senate Campaign Committee, Brian Kemp, all these so-called moderates don't think twice about hiring Ali Alexander to bring in his enforcers, his brown shirts, his freaks as a, quote, get out the vote group, because that's how they see activating their base. So it's a kind of wink and nod situation. On one hand, they say, oh, those terrible rioters, oh, those terrible super right-wing Republicans who are out of control and won't elect the nice Mr. McCarthy as speaker. These are the same people who hired this guy, who used these brown shirts as enforcers, as to bring out their troops and to keep the ultra-right wing within the Republican Party because they need them, they want them. That's the real truth, and they create an intimidation force in places like Georgia, where there's still, you have to understand, there's tremendous problems with intimidation, especially in minority communities, among young people. They are enforcers. And the idea that the Republican establishment is yes, they say tisk, we want nothing to do with Ali Alexander except that they hire him. That's what has to be exposed. And I want to bring up something else while Zach is here, because Zach covered remember, before the January 6th attack on the Capitol, there were other kind of movements on the Capitol. They didn't break through, but there were prior demonstrations. They're not demonstrations like you and I remember from the war where we were nice people. We're talking about people trying to break into the Capitol, create mayhem. And the question was what Zach was witnessing, and I hope maybe he can jump in here a bit on the cops. There are too many cops who are too solicitous and too suspiciously close to these guys. Let's not forget, as the other thing I reported, which did not get picked up, and this is very important, in violation of the police manual and the FBI manual, they did not arrest or stop anyone from leaving the building. These were perpetrators and witnesses, and the FBI and police manuals require that all these people be booked, their names taken down, their cell phones taken. That is basic police procedure in any crime in which there is any property damage or violence. And there were people who were dead, and they didn't do it. They let these guys go. Why?
Zach, why don't you jump in here? Tell us a little bit more, a background on this, and more about what we should know about these folks going forward, because, again, violence is the word of the day.
I mean, one thing you'll notice if you read over 800 pages of the January 6th report that's really missing is any real discussion about the involvement or lack of involvement of the many police forces. There are multiple police forces. There's the Park Police, there's the MPD, there's the Capitol Police, there's Secret Service, there's any number of other agencies that work in D.C. at any different time. The number of people that I've seen for lefty protests getting arrested by multiple different agencies at one single protest, it's stunning. But for some reason, if the right-wing protests in D.C., that's something I've documented for multiple years. The Proud Boys get escorted throughout the city. That was after the January 4th. If you remember Donald Trump's big January 4th that he had a couple years ago, the Proud Boys marched and basically marauded around the city, harassing people and literally getting into fights, and police escorted them and gave them directions and literally fist bumped them as they went into their local bar, and the police chanted "I love beer" because it was during it was right near the Kavanaugh hearings. I have this on this is well documented. And then just right before COVID hit D.C., you had Patriot Front marching in our street, another fascist organization that marched with police security coming in from Virginia, marching down the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, and then all the way up to the steps of the Capitol, something I've never seen in my life in organized protest. And the journalists and the few activists that were there to counter-protest were blocked from getting anywhere near Patriot Front, allowing them to have their nice little rally so they could get film and that sort of thing for their trailers and their recruitment videos. And also they were wearing masks at the time, which before COVID, we have to remember, it was illegal in Washington, D.C. to wear a mask. You would get arrested if you wore a mask. But for some reason, this group of 30 or 40 Patriot Front members were able to just march right on through. I got body checked to the ground. Another protester literally with a cane got picked up and thrown at this protest. But Patriot Front just kind of marched on, and they did it. They continually do it. March for Life is coming up in a couple weeks in D.C. They'll likely show up there, and they'll be allowed to march once again, even though they're a fascist organization that's been arrested in Idaho, for goodness sake. I mean, Idaho police.
And Zach, just to state the obvious, Zach, there was a lot of information a year and a day from today about what was going to go down, about who was involved. But the FBI, which is less than 1% agents of color, 0.03 or something, doesn't really care much, and we're not aware of how dangerous white racists could be. So we saw this. They got the go-ahead for January 6th.
Oh, most certainly. I mean, if you look at the messages between the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, they were organizing, and they knew that they weren't going to have to deal with police in any real way. They knew about this ahead of time, and the fact that the FBI knew that there was a likely threat happening. I mean, there were articles published about this. There was discussion. This was a commonly known thing within my world of research that something big was going to happen on January 6th. Did we think that they'd actually physically be able to break into the Capitol? I didn't think so, because I thought there would be more than 30 police officers guarding the front door. You would think that, any time that you had a large rally in D.C., the Capitol was usually on some level, not locked down like you couldn't get into it, but there was certainly enough guards out there that if the lefty protest went on if the Greenpeace protesters went on a wild march to the Capitol, there'd be police there to stop them from happening. But for some reason on that day, every single level of police force failed. And I don't know. I mean, the same thing happened before Charlottesville. There was massive before the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville. There was massive intel on every level. Police knew it. Activists on the ground knew it. That's why they knew to show up with the tear gas mask. They knew what was going to come there. And for some reason, again, the police did nothing. The Virginia State Police did nothing. And now we have massive messages coming out, discussions between Proud Boys and local police forces across the country that they're having they literally just chat before they hold a protest. And this
Zach,
is a problem that
Go on, please. Sorry.
Oh, but this is one of the biggest problems that anytime I have a discussion about this, is that I end up emphasizing the fact that our police forces, the people who are supposed to be there to protect us against threats like this, they know the FBI comes out with intelligence every single year talking about who are the biggest threats, and they report every single year. Even during the Trump administration, they report that white extremists across the country are the biggest threat. They are statistically not only most likely, but they are the ones that do by far more physical threats with actual people getting injured and killed than lefties or even Islamic-based terrorism. And for some reason, we just refuse to do that. Like, you read the January 6th report, we don't have that discussion in there about what's going to stop the next January 6th.
It's amazing. Greg, you want to do the closer on this? Where does this go from here? It seems like there's going to be no check on the violence.
what I'm concerned about is that the committee is aimed towards putting everything on Donald Trump, who it looks pretty clear at this point may be a political has-been anyway. And somehow the Republican Party, the police establishment are getting away with it. And the ultra right, yeah, they're indicting a few people, and some of these guys will end up in prison. But the games being played by the GOP establishment with these ultra right factions, in addition to the fact that let's put it out on the table. This couldn't happen unless there was some sympathy within those police forces. Like Zach talked about the fist bumping between the Proud Boys and the Capitol Police. This has to be investigated, and to me, it comes down to how come those guys. Number one, how come there was no in all the Ali Alexander stuff? I didn't see anything in the testimony. Maybe I missed it, Zach, that said, how come you're on the payroll of the Republican National Senate campaign? Where is this heading? And in addition, why did you ignore police procedure and let these perpetrators of crimes walk away? I'm not talking about, when Biden says, what would have happened with black people? Yeah, they would have gunned them down. I'm talking about basic policing. People walk out of the building, you get their names, addresses, and you take their cell phones, which are the evidence, with all their selfies in the mayhem.
Didn't happen.
And they didn't do it. We
happen.
have to find – this is systemic and not about a few crazy right-wing nutcases.
Absolutely, and I think let's end with Zach today. And I think, Zach, the fact that I could never get over is that there you were facing off in that car garage with the extreme right, Jews will not replace us, right, and you're in a car garage that happens to be the garage for the police department. So the garage is full of police cars, while the extreme right is beating the living, crap out of people, and you're in a face-off that could have cost you your life. And where were the cops? They were upstairs in the station. Why did these folks feel comfortable doing this in a police parking garage?
They chose that parking garage for a reason. They knew that it was the police parking garage, and so because they know that, just like, this is the same story of like during Occupy Wall Street. There were massive reports that basically the NYPD was getting messages about basically before Antifa was a thing. It was Occupy Wall Street protesters. Oh, they have knives. Oh, they're going to attack police. They have plans to do things. All these things never happened. They were unarmed, and they build these conspiracies behind the police unions and that sort of thing. Build these conspiracies behind any lefty protesters, but for some reason, the right wing, Oath Keepers and that sort of thing, who actually have firearms on them and have a stance that is explicitly anti-police as well. Like this Blue Lives Matter junk that they have been pulling for so long doesn't go along when so many of their members are sovereign citizens and in that world where they don't believe that they are able to be policed, that policing is for other people. And so, again, until we deal with the problem of white supremacy and white extremism within our own police forces, I don't know how January 6th doesn't happen again in, whether it be in Atlanta, whether it be in Lansing, whether it be in Oregon, wherever. This is going to happen again until we have some sort of protection against it.
Listen, you guys, amazing reporting. Greg Palast, gregpalast.com. Zach Roberts, the photographer that works with Greg Palast, puts his body on the line so that we can understand a lot more of the information we need to know, which we're not getting, even though the committee did some interesting investigative work. They didn't touch this story, and it's crucial. Again, I'm Dennis Bernstein. We do the Election Crimes Bulletin with Greg Palast. He's at gregpalast.com. You might want to check that out. He's got the film Vigilantes, and we're going to keep on this story. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Zach. Please stay safe. We'll talk to you both soon.